I've been at the Betty Ford Center for almost 21 years. So a long time, and I'm one of those people at the Betty Ford Center incredibly blessed because I was there with Mrs. Ford. And Mrs. Ford loved the children's program. It was one of the things that was most special to her about the entire Betty Ford experience. Well, how did I get into the work that I do? Well, first of all, I grew up with it. So I grew up in a family that had been hurt by alcoholism. And an incredible blessing came into my life at the age of 14. I got help. And my life slowly began to change. And then my mother's life changed, and my dad's life changed. And all of a sudden, the end of my teen years is growing up in a family with recovery. Well, little did I realize, but you look back at my life and how everything was lining up for that. So I'd already been trained as a teacher, so I knew how to work with children, knew how to teach them, knew how to do education plans and be age appropriate. So I went back to school to learn how to be a counselor, to learn how to be a therapist, and then created a program in Northern California where I was born and raised, and ended up in Arizona at a treatment center, helping them to establish a children's program. And then all of a sudden the Betty Ford Center called me and said, we'd really like you to come in, take a look at what we're doing with the children's program, but can you revamp it? Can you make it more child friendly? And so, the key to working with boys and girls is to develop a relationship with them. Because kids don't care about how much you know until they know about how much you care. One of the most important things for these programs is they need to be child-centered. And if you look at the program, there's 4 things we want to do. Number 1, teach kids about what alcoholism and drug addiction are in an age-appropriate way. Helping them to see that it's not their fault, they're not alone, they're not to blame. Secondly, providing opportunities for boys and girls to begin to talk about what it's been like. Thirdly, to teach them some coping skills. So what do you do? How do you handle all this stress? What are some ways to care for yourself? And we teach kids about safe people. Who can you talk to about this? So every boy and girl gets a phone number to the Betty Ford Center that they can call 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And then lastly, helping boys and girls to see their special qualities and to also create some resilience. So whatever challenges they face, now they have some skills and tools and people in their lives that they can begin to face those challenges with all of that in mind and to cope more successfully. We serve 1,500 boys and girls and their family members on a yearly basis in Betty Ford Center children's programs. 31,000 over the last 20 years that I've been there. And we've always held dearly Mrs. Ford's wish that no child is ever turned away due to an inability to pay. Now, I've written a number of books through the years. Some of the books are specifically for children. And then I've written books for parents and have written books for therapists and counselors, how to do this work. And it's teaching people how to do this so that they can continue on in this process and serve more boys and girls. There's not a month that goes by that I don't hear from someone who I've worked with through the years. I got a call on the 4th of July at the Betty Ford Center about noontime, and it was from a gentleman who was calling, and it took me a while to remember. It's a lot of years, it's a lot of people. And he'd been in treatment at the first treatment center that I worked at in Northern California, Sequoia Hospital, and it was his 36-year sobriety date. So he'd been sober 36 years. And once he told me the story, I started to remember bits and pieces of it. And he just said, thank you. What you did for me was huge. And then he said, my daughter's here. Would you like to speak with my daughter? She was 9 years old when she was in your children's program. And so do the math, she's 45 years old. And what was amazing was I asked her, and I said, what did you remember? And she remembered 3 things. She remembered an activity that we play called the addiction game, where she was able to separate her dad from the disease, because the disease goes like this, and teaching kids to separate those. She remembered that and that it wasn't her fault. She remembered an activity where she had to carry a backpack with 41 pounds of rocks in it, which shows the kind of stuff people carry inside, and we get better by letting that out. But the third thing she said was, I remember how much you cared. That's the key.